Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
When I first saw the mangled mess of metal that used to be my car sitting half on the sidewalk, nose deep into a leaning utility pole with the bumper split like a peeled banana, my gut didn't twist in panic or fear, and my heart didn't race with concern. There was no breathless moment of horror, no frantic call asking if my brother was alive. No, instead I stood there, staring at the wreckage of what had once been the only reliable thing I owned, and felt a quiet, burning sense of inevitability. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even shocked. I was just tired. Josh was already sitting on the curb, nursing a scraped elbow and smirking like a guy who spilled coffee on a shirt he didn't even like. He didn't look ashamed or scared or even particularly apologetic. He looked bored, like I had inconvenienced him by showing up. And when I walked up slow, measured, trying to keep my voice from cracking, he didn't even stand. He just looked up at me, nodded at the wreck, and said, in that casual, smug tone that he's perfected since we were teenagers, "It's just a car, Rachel. Mom and Dad will fix it like they always do." That line, cracked something open inside me. Not just because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them. He believed it. Fully. He believed that our parents, in their endless cycle of forgiveness and blind protection, would swoop in with a checkbook, smooth things over, and I'd do what I always did: sigh, roll my eyes, and move on. That was the script. That was the rhythm we'd all danced to for decades. But standing there in the summer heat, the smell of leaking coolant sharp in the air, I realized I wasn't just looking at a wrecked car. I was looking at 20 years of being the responsible one while Josh lived life like a man with an invisible safety net. I saw every family dinner where his failures were softened by phrases like, "He's just figuring things out," and "Boys make mistakes." I saw every time I skipped vacations to help with their mortgage, every time I canceled plans because he needed a ride or lost his job or forgot to pay a share of something we'd split. And I saw the future, a future where this cycle never ends. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even respond to him. I just turned around and walked toward the tow truck guy who was waiting by the side of the road, avoiding eye contact like he'd seen this exact drama 100 times. He asked if I wanted to ride with the car to the shop, and I nodded, not because I cared about the car, but because I couldn't sit in silence with Josh for one more minute. While we drove, I replayed the last few years like a low-budget documentary in my head. There was the time he took my debit card just to grab gas and overdraft it buying sneakers. The time he used my Netflix login, then my credit card for a one-time Uber ride that turned into a weekend in Miami. The time he crashed Mom's old Civic and blamed the brakes. The time he moved in with me for just 2 weeks and stayed 7 months, never once buying groceries. Each moment layered itself over the next until the image of that wrecked car didn't feel like a single event. It felt like a culmination. A breaking point. Back at my apartment later that night, I sat with a beer I didn't want and stared at the insurance claim in my inbox. The damage was extensive. The car was likely totaled. And the claim had been filed already, submitted online, apparently, using my policy account, which Josh had the login for because of some emergency last year. My stomach clenched as I scrolled through the details. Most of it was boilerplate. Until I got to the bottom. There it was. A digital signature. Not mine. But his name, scribbled like a child pretending to be a doctor, was attached to an official insurance claim filed in my name. My mouth actually went dry. That was fraud. That was illegal. That was, finally, something solid. Something real. Not just guilt. Not just family drama or bad judgment. This was proof. And I wish I could say I felt triumphant. That I smiled, finally holding a weapon instead of a bandage. But the truth was more complicated. I felt nauseous. Because I knew the moment I did anything with it, everything would shift. This wasn't just about a car. This was about years of being second place to someone who never earned first. About a family that had let one child rot so long, they didn't even recognize the stench. But even with the heaviness in my gut, the next morning, I did what no one expected. I printed the report. I didn't call Josh. I didn't confront him. I just printed it, placed it in a folder, and locked it in my desk. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't sweeping this one under the rug. Not this time. Later that week, we had dinner at our parents' house. Just the four of us, like old times. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, too many forced smiles. Josh acted like nothing happened. Told a story about a fender bender and how insurance will sort it. Dad nodded. Mom poured more wine. I just watched. Quiet. And just as Josh started bragging about maybe borrowing the new car once the payout came through, I leaned in across the table, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "Not unless you're willing to sign another claim." His smile twitched. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Dad looked confused. But I kept eating like I hadn't just fired the opening shot in a war I never wanted, but was more than ready to finish. Because here's the thing, some lines, once crossed, don't disappear. They burn. And the smell of that scorched bridge? Well, let's just say it doesn't come out easy. There's a kind of numbness that settles into your bones when you've spent your whole life as the one who absorbs the fallout, the one who's supposed to be level-headed and practical and endlessly forgiving. Even when forgiveness feels less like a virtue and more like a prison sentence you never agreed to serve, and that numbness doesn't come all at once, it seeps in slow, like water under a door, soaking everything until the floorboards of your own sense of worth start to rot from the inside out. That was me. That was my role. The older sister. The fixer. The responsible one. And Josh, well, Josh was a full-time hurricane with a charming smile and an instinct for survival that bordered on parasitic. From the time we were kids, the rules were clear even if they were never written down. When Josh broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, I was the one who had to knock on the door and apologize. When he stole candy from a gas station, I was the one who returned it with a red face and a lecture memorized from our parents' half-hearted attempts at discipline. I learned early that if Josh messed up, the safest bet was to jump in front of the blast before it hit anyone else, because otherwise, it would fall on our mother's nerves and our father's temper, and, somehow, even then, the collateral damage would still ricochet back onto me. What made it worse was that Josh wasn't stupid. He wasn't malicious in the traditional sense, not the way you might picture a bully or a thief or an outright criminal. No, he was soft-spoken when it mattered, just loud enough to impress at a party, just emotional enough to make you second-guess your anger. He didn't storm through life. He coasted, relying on the willingness of others to smooth out the road ahead. And our parents, God help them, they were the chief engineers of that roadwork. I remember one time, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Josh was supposed to start a new job at a warehouse. He had begged for help getting his car fixed just to make the commute, promised he'd pay me back for the tires I fronted him for, tires that cost me a weekend trip to Seattle I had planned with friends. But of course, 3 days into the job, he quit. Said the manager was condescending and disrespectful, and that he wasn't going to let anyone talk to him like that. I made a snide comment, something about how maybe if he showed up on time and didn't smell like a vape pen, he'd be treated with more respect. And of course, Mom turned it around on me. "Rachel, don't kick him when he's down. You don't understand how hard it is for your brother." She said it like I hadn't spent most of my adult life dragging myself up out of holes I didn't dig. And so, the story repeated. Josh made messes. I cleaned them. He ran out of money. I covered the gap. He needed a place to crash. I gave up my couch, then my bed, then my peace of mind. And every time I protested, every time I drew a line, it got smudged out by guilt or obligation or the quiet, heavy weight of being told, "You're the strong one, Rachel. You've always been the strong one." But after the crash, after that smug little shrug and the line, "It's just a car," I started paying attention in a new way. I didn't yell or confront or demand an apology. I just watched. And when I saw the insurance claim in my inbox, and when I noticed the forged signature, my brother's name, scribbled in lazy confidence as if it were nothing more than signing a birthday card, I felt that familiar heat rise in my chest. But it was different this time. It wasn't the burn of rage or panic. It was the slow, steady boil of calculation. I realized then that maybe Josh wasn't the only one capable of playing a long game. Maybe I had spent so long being the cleanup crew that I forgot I could flip the whole damn house if I wanted to. I spent the next few days gathering everything, every receipt, every email, every text, every instance I could find where he had borrowed, broken, taken, or assumed. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but I wanted it. I wanted the evidence. Not just for legal leverage, but because I needed to see it all laid out in black and white. I needed to be reminded that this wasn't a one-off mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And I had been complicit. Then, on a random Tuesday, while I was halfway through microwaving leftovers, I got a call from Bryce, the insurance adjuster. He had a casual, friendly voice, the kind of tone that says, "I've seen 1,000 people try to lie to me, and I'm already bored by your story." I liked him immediately. When I told him I hadn't filed the claim, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, I figured." The signature looked off. We flagged it. He asked me if I wanted to pursue it as fraud, explained the implications, the legal process, the potential for charges, and I told him I needed time to think. But before we hung up, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, I've worked this job for almost 15 years, and there's one thing I've learned. When family screws you, it always cuts deeper than money. And the ones who get away with it? They don't stop. Not until someone finally makes it stop." That night, as I tried to sleep, I kept thinking about all the times I'd made excuses for Josh, all the times I convinced myself he just needed one more chance. Maybe I had been strong. But maybe strength wasn't about carrying the weight. Maybe real strength was finally setting it down and letting someone else trip over the mess they made. And here's the kicker. A few days later, we had dinner again. Family tradition, like clockwork. Josh was in rare form that night, laughing like a man with no worries, making jokes about how hard it is to adult these days, teasing me about my control freak tendencies. And then, with that same smug confidence, he leaned back in his chair, stretched, and said, "Once the check clears, maybe I'll take Rachel's new ride for a spin. You don't mind, do you, sis?" I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, slow and steady, and said, "Not unless you're willing to sign another claim." He froze. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see the flicker of confusion turn to discomfort. Mom looked at me like I'd just spit in the soup. Dad shifted in his seat, unsure whether to laugh or scold. But I didn't explain. I didn't soften the blow. I just kept eating, slowly, deliberately, and let the silence stretch between us like a drawn wire, humming with everything I wasn't saying yet. Because the truth was, I had already taken the first step. I had the file. I had the proof. I had the quiet, dangerous satisfaction of knowing that, for the first time in my life, I held the match, and if I chose to, I could burn it all down. There's a certain point in life where you stop hoping someone will change, not because you've lost your optimism entirely, and not because you've grown bitter or cynical beyond repair, but because you finally recognize that what you once mistook for temporary immaturity or bad luck is actually a well-rehearsed act. An identity worn like a second skin by someone who knows exactly how to manipulate their surroundings to avoid accountability, and that realization, though long overdue, settles over you with the weight of something final. That was where I stood with Josh. Not standing on a cliff ready to jump, not standing at a crossroads trying to decide, but planted firmly, with both feet on the cold concrete of reality, finally seeing my brother not as a flawed person doing his best, but as a grown man who had made a sport out of getting away with things and expected the world, especially our world, to clean up after him without question. After our awkward, tension-soaked dinner where I dropped the subtle grenade about him signing another claim form, I didn't say anything more to anyone in the family. I didn't take the bait when Mom called a few days later, her voice overly cheerful, her real concern hiding beneath a thin layer of small talk, nor did I respond to Josh's single-line text, "What was that supposed to mean?" which read more like a dare than a question. I stayed quiet. I kept watching. I kept gathering. And most importantly, I made another call to Bryce. Bryce, with his dry humor and disarming professionalism, was becoming more than just an insurance adjuster. He was quickly turning into a much-needed voice of clarity. The kind of person who speaks in truths without wrapping them in family-friendly packaging. When I explained that I'd found even more evidence of Josh's financial recklessness, Some old Venmo transfers with fake rent descriptions, an email thread where he used my name to get out of a late fee on his phone bill. Bryce chuckled under his breath and said, "Your brother's got a real talent for paperwork." Unfortunately, that talent might land him in front of a judge if he's not careful. I asked him plainly if we were dealing with something serious now, not just a slap on the wrist, but something that could follow Josh for years. Bryce didn't hesitate. He filed a false claim under someone else's insurance account. That's fraud, Rachel. And because it crossed state lines electronically, it can be federal. I sat with that for a long moment, letting the words settle around me like dust in a room that's been locked up too long. Fraud. Federal. These were not terms I had ever associated with my family, at least not until recently. For so many years, we'd all danced around Josh's behavior with language that softened the edges. He was impulsive, he was struggling, he was misunderstood. But suddenly, it was impossible to ignore that what Josh had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a crime. And more than that, it was a crime done casually, carelessly, as if he truly believed nothing bad could ever really touch him. Bryce asked if I wanted to pursue it formally. He wasn't pushing me, just giving me the option. You're not obligated to take it all the way, but I'll tell you this. Guys like your brother don't stop until someone makes them. Right now, he thinks he's untouchable. That's dangerous. For you, for him, for everyone. I thanked him, told him I needed more time, and hung up. That night, my phone rang again. This time, it was Josh. No preamble. No pleasantries. Just his voice, cold and brittle. "I talked to the insurance guy," he said. "You told him I committed fraud?" I didn't answer right away, just let the silence hang there while I walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the parking lot, empty except for one rusted-out truck and a stray cat curled beneath it. "He talked to me," I said eventually. "And yes, I gave him the documents. Your signature was on a claim I didn't file." "What did you expect me to do, Josh? Pretend I didn't see it?" There was a pause on his end, but it wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said finally, voice quiet now, like the air had gone out of him. "I thought you'd be pissed, sure, but not this. You don't turn on family, Ratch." I almost laughed at the irony, but it stuck in my throat. "I didn't turn on anyone," I said. "I stopped letting you turn on me." He hung up without another word. The next day, Bryce called again. His tone was different, lighter, maybe a little amused, though he tried to hide it. "Just so you know, your brother called me too," he said. "Tried to tell me the claim was your idea. Said you were covering something up." I blinked, stunned but not surprised. Did he really think that would work? I asked. Bryce snorted. "Hard to say. Some people are so used to lying that the truth starts to sound like the crazy version." For the next 48 hours, I wrestled with what to do. Taking it to the authorities meant blowing the whole thing wide open. It meant forcing my parents to see Josh in a light they had spent their lives avoiding. It meant giving up any chance of smoothing things over, of being the good daughter who keeps the family intact. But doing nothing felt worse. It felt like accepting a role I didn't believe in anymore. It felt like giving him permission to do it again, to someone else, or even back to me. Then, on Sunday morning, just as I was finishing my second coffee, an email arrived. It was from Bryce. The subject line was simple, FYI, recording attached. Inside was a brief note. He didn't know I record all claim-related calls. "Thought you'd want to hear this." I clicked play. Josh's voice came through clearly, nervous, but trying to sound confident. "Look, I don't know what my sister told you, but she's got issues, man. She's always been jealous. That car? She let me drive it. I didn't do anything wrong. She's just pissed because I didn't let her boss me around for once. I think she's using this to get back at me. She might have signed the claim herself." I listened to the whole thing. All 4 minutes and 17 seconds of deflection, manipulation, and lies. When it ended, I sat still for a long time, staring at the screen, hands steady. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. I was clear. I knew what I had to do next. I didn't call Josh. I didn't reply to my mom's weekend check-in. I just picked up the folder from my desk, added a new page to it, the transcript of that call, and made an appointment for the following Monday with a legal advisor Bryce had recommended. Because at some point, the line between family and accountability stops being a line at all. It becomes a choice. And I had finally made mine. There's something unexplainably satisfying about watching a man who's lived his whole life on a throne made of other people's sacrifices finally lose his balance, not because you want to see him fall out of cruelty or spite, but because you need to believe, if only for your own sanity, that the laws of gravity still apply to everyone, even to golden boys with mothers who worship them and fathers who defend them with tired eyes and clenched jaws. And when I say Josh cracked, I don't mean he exploded in some dramatic, cinematic fashion with screaming matches or fists through drywall, because men like him don't break that way. They unravel slowly, one thread at a time, trying to patch themselves up with the same tired tactics they've always used: charm, denial, blame, until eventually, they realize those tricks only work on people who still believe in them. And I had stopped believing a long time ago. The fallout began quietly, as most unravelings do. A friend of mine from high school, who happened to work in HR at a mid-sized tech company downtown, reached out to me one morning with a short, slightly awkward message. Apparently, Josh had applied for a job there the previous week, nothing fancy, just a junior-level operations role, but his name triggered a flag during the background screening, which now included basic financial and legal cross-checks thanks to some new company policy. When I asked her what the issue was, she hesitated, but eventually admitted that the preliminary report noted a pending internal fraud review related to an insurance claim. Language that doesn't scream criminal, but certainly doesn't scream stability either. He didn't get the interview. He wouldn't even be considered for future roles without clearance. That was the first domino. The second came in the form of our parents, who showed up unannounced at my apartment the following Sunday, standing outside my door like a pair of worn-out diplomats trying to prevent a war they had spent too many years pretending wasn't brewing. My mother looked fragile in a way I wasn't used to seeing, not physically, but emotionally, as if some long-held illusion had finally started to rot from the inside, and my father, always quieter in his disappointment, couldn't meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. I invited them in, reluctantly, and we sat around my small kitchen table, the same one Josh had eaten takeout at for months, without ever once offering to wash a dish or buy a meal. They didn't come right out and say they knew. They asked questions. They danced around the truth like it was too hot to hold. "We just want to understand what's going on," my mother said, folding her hands so tightly her knuckles went pale. "Josh is upset. He feels like you're punishing him." That word, punishing, hung in the air like smoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes or snap. I just looked at them, tired and firm, and said, "He forged my name and committed insurance fraud. This isn't a sibling fight. It's a crime." They exchanged a glance, as if silently negotiating how much of that statement they were willing to accept. My father cleared his throat. "But you know your brother. He doesn't think things through. He's not malicious. I cut him off with a sharpness I hadn't used before, not toward them. "He doesn't think things through because he's never had to. Every time he messed up, you stepped in. Every time I got hurt cleaning up after him, you told me to be the bigger person. And now? Now you want to talk about understanding." For the first time, my mother looked shaken, not just sad but deeply rattled, like something inside her worldview had cracked, and I saw the beginnings of guilt bloom behind her eyes. But guilt without action is nothing but noise. I told them I had already spoken with a legal advisor. That charges hadn't been filed yet, but they could be. That Josh had tried to lie to the insurance company, had tried to throw me under the bus when things got tough, and that I had the recording to prove it. I laid it all out. No embellishments, no anger, just facts. They left quietly, offering no resolution, just vague promises to talk to Josh and work this out like a family, as if decades of dysfunction could be healed with a single sit-down. I didn't argue. I didn't say goodbye. I just closed the door and locked it behind them. What I didn't expect, though, was for Josh to come back swinging. 2 days later, I got an email from the insurance company's internal fraud department, informing me that my claim file had been reopened following a new statement submitted by another involved party. I knew immediately what had happened. Josh had doubled down. He had submitted a new version of events, one where I had allegedly given him full permission to use the car, one where the signature on the claim had been pre-authorized verbally, and where I had changed my story after we had a falling out. It was bold, desperate, and stupid. Bryce called that evening, his voice taut with disbelief. He's trying to outmaneuver a recorded phone call with a Word doc full of contradictions, he said. It's almost impressive if it wasn't so idiotic. He assured me nothing would come of it, the documentation I provided, the call recording, even his own notes from our conversations all painted a clear picture, but he warned me to be careful. Guys like this, when they feel cornered, they don't think straight. They lash out. Don't be surprised if he tries something else. And he did. That night, Josh showed up at my apartment. Not the Josh who smiled at family dinners or charmed cashiers with lazy banter. This was the version with his back against the wall, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, and posture like a man one bad word away from snapping. He didn't knock, he pounded. I didn't open the door. I spoke through the deadbolt. You need to leave, I said, calmly, evenly. This is done. He laughed, but it was hollow, forced. You're ruining everything, Rachel. Over what? A car. I didn't respond. He kept going. You think you're better than me? You've always thought that, haven't you? But you're not. You're just a bitter, lonely bitch who got lucky for once. That last word echoed through the door like a gunshot. I stayed quiet. He stood there for a moment longer, breathing hard, then walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked back to my kitchen, poured a glass of water with hands that only shook a little, and sat down. He was unraveling. The golden boy was cracking. And I knew, the final break was coming. But I also knew something else. I wasn't going to be the one who put him back together. Not this time. There's a strange kind of silence that comes in the moments after you've burned a bridge so thoroughly there's not even ash left to sift through, a silence that's not peaceful or triumphant, but eerily still, like the air after a storm when the damage has already been done. Yet the world hasn't caught up with the new reality. That silence surrounded me in the days that followed Josh's final visit, a quiet I had earned not through revenge as most people imagine it, loud, violent, cathartic, but through precision, patience, and the cold, deliberate dismantling of an illusion that had kept our entire family stuck in the same endless cycle of denial and dysfunction. When I woke the morning after he pounded on my door, the sky was slate gray and wet, not quite raining but threatening it, the kind of weather that made the city feel heavy, as if even the air didn't want to deal with anyone's problems that day. I made coffee without turning on the news, sat at the table in my pajamas with my laptop open, and stared at the half-written email to the insurance fraud division, the one where I was supposed to give them final confirmation to proceed with a formal report, the one that would most likely trigger legal consequences for my brother. I had written it 3 times, deleted it twice. I wasn't hesitating because I doubted whether he deserved it. He did. It was never about that. What held my finger above the send button was something more deeply embedded, more generational, more difficult to name. It was the part of me that still heard my mother's voice, softly begging for family unity, and the echo of my father's disappointed sighs when we couldn't just work things out like adults. It was the part of me that had always been the peacemaker, the one who tucked rage into neat little drawers and convinced herself that being the bigger person was the same thing as healing. But something had changed. The person I was when Josh signed my name and filed a fraudulent claim wasn't the same person who sat at that table a few weeks later, sipping coffee with the clarity of someone who finally understood that forgiveness doesn't mean what we've been told it means. Forgiveness isn't turning the other cheek so someone can hit you again. It isn't silence so the family dinner can stay comfortable. Forgiveness is freedom, and it can't be given to someone who weaponizes it. So I didn't send the email. Not yet. Instead, I drove. I went to the junkyard where the wrecked remains of my car had ended up, a sad, twisted mess of steel and plastic half-covered in dust and bird droppings, its front still crumpled like a punched-in jaw. I stood in front of it, staring at the damage, and for a long moment I felt nothing. Not loss. Not grief. Not even anger. It was just metal. What it represented, though, was something bigger, something that had finally reached the end of its life cycle. I walked around it slowly, phone in hand, and took a single photo. Then I texted it to Josh, no message, no explanation, just the image of the crushed, unrepairable shell he had left behind. A few seconds later, I added a single line beneath the image. "It's just a car, right?" He didn't respond. Not then. Not that day. Not the day after either. And as the hours passed, I realized I didn't care whether he did. That silence, that absence of a reply, felt like the cleanest break I had ever experienced. He didn't know it yet, but I had no intention of ever speaking to him again, not as a sister, not as an enemy, not even as an acquaintance. My contact with him was over, not out of hate, but because you don't keep speaking to someone who only ever hears what serves them. A week later, my parents called. This time I answered. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because part of me needed to hear how far their delusion had stretched, how far they were willing to bend in order to keep the version of Josh they'd clung to for decades. The conversation was exactly what I expected. They were vague, careful, cautious in their language. My father spoke first, suggesting maybe this had all gone too far, that perhaps there was a way to back down gracefully. My mother, her voice brittle and weary, asked me to consider how much pain Josh must be in to have lashed out the way he did. I listened to every word, nodding to myself in silence as they spoke, not because I agreed, but because I understood something they didn't. They weren't talking to me. They were talking to a ghost of who I used to be, the daughter who would always put family first, even if it meant putting herself last. So I told them the truth. I told them that Josh had tried to lie to a federal adjuster, that he had committed fraud, tried to blame me for it, and when that didn't work, tried to intimidate me into silence. I told them that if I hadn't been the kind of person who documented everything, who stayed calm and calculated, I could have ended up being the one facing consequences. And then I told them the part they weren't ready to hear, that I wasn't interested in repairing things. Not with Josh. Not anymore. My mother cried. My father got quiet. They didn't argue. Maybe they finally realized that something irreparable had happened, not just to my car, not just to our family dynamics, but to the very foundation of our relationships. And the thing about foundations is, once they're cracked in the wrong way, you can patch and paint all you want, but sooner or later, the whole structure will shift, and nothing built on top of it will hold. A few months passed. I moved. Nothing dramatic, just a clean little one-bedroom in a different part of the city, far enough that nobody could drop by, but close enough to keep my job and my favorite coffee shop. I changed my number, blocked Josh on everything, told my parents they could visit if they called first, and agreed not to mention him. They haven't taken me up on it yet. One day, while sorting through a box of old bills and paperwork, I found the folder, the one with the claim, the forged signature, the transcript of the call. I flipped through it slowly, thinking maybe I'd toss it now, maybe let it go for good. But I didn't. I put it in the back of a cabinet, behind tax documents and expired warranties. Not because I planned to use it, but because some wounds, even when healed, deserve a scar to remind you what you survived. In the end, I never filed the report. Not because he didn't deserve it, he did 1,000 times over, but because filing it would have kept me tethered to the wreckage. And I didn't want to win by holding on. I wanted to win by walking away. So no, I didn't get a new car right away. I took the bus for a while. Rode a bike. Learned to live smaller, lighter, with fewer things but more peace. And when people asked what happened, I told them the truth, just not the whole of it. Because some stories, once they're finished, don't need to be retold. Maybe Josh still thinks I betrayed him. Maybe my parents still think I overreacted. But what they think doesn't matter anymore. Because sometimes, the real explosion isn't loud. It doesn't shatter windows or leave smoke. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision made in the privacy of your own mind, the decision to stop playing the role you were cast in without your consent, to step off the stage and let the house burn behind you if it has to. And that's what I did. I didn't burn everything. But I left the match on the table. And I walked away.